Good evening, everyone, and welcome. And I hope you'll find this a very worthwhile text to listen to and learn about if you don't know about it already. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the Yoga Vasistha. It's a profoundly spiritual Indian scripture, but it is not nearly so well known in the West as are the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. Certainly, much of it is written as a sacred text, but it does in addition contain mythological stories to illustrate points, which doesn't happen in the other sacred texts in the same way, to my knowledge. There may be parables, for example, but they're not in the same league. And then I will read you one of these stories this evening. It dates from possibly as early as the 6th or 7th centuries and possibly reached its current form somewhere between the 11th and 14th centuries. It's a particular favorite of mine because of its mix of the deeply mystical coupled with sometimes amusing but always thought-provoking stories it contains. It emphasizes the nature of reality as distinct from the world of illusion, the Sanskrit word for which is Maya. The former being eternal and unchanging, and the lateral, ephemeral and ever-changing. It explains that liberation is the result of realizing the unity of the individual with the whole, and that the result of this is the ending of suffering and sorrow. No one's saying this is easy, but that's what the message is, and it appears over and over again throughout the text. The importance of this text is illustrated by a story narrated by the sage Vasistha, one of the teachers of Rama, and the text itself is by many attributed to Valmiki, the author of the great Indian epic, the Ramayana. One of Valmiki's disciples was granted a boon by Brahma, the creator god, after narrating the story of the Yoga Vasistha. He requested as his boon that all human beings may be freed from unhappiness, and he begged Brahma to find the best way to achieve this. Brahma's reply was this: your story of Rama should be the raft with which men will cross the ocean of samsara, that is repetitive history. So a raft on which with which men will cross the ocean of samsara. In other words, by hearing and of course applying the teaching given in the Yoga Vasistha, humans have the possibility of being freed from the pain caused by our karmic load. So I would like to say something about all translated texts, including the version that I use almost exclusively. And here's a picture of that text, the one that I use. And notice it's called the Supreme Yoga, the Yoga Vasistha. This version, which is translated by Swami Vivekananda, Venkatesananda, was first published in 1976. And what I like about it is that it's broken down into daily readings. And so to me, that's an incentive to use it daily. So several times I've started it at the beginning of a year, and I will use it as a precursor to meditation. And I find by reading it, it brings me more often than not to a still enough point to be able to start meditating instead of just sitting down and trying to plunge into it. So I think it's very helpful. Now, a note on translations. All translators use some license in translating, and many, if not most, Sanskrit words are notorious for having a multitude of possible meanings to choose from. This means that translations vary considerably in Sanskrit texts, as I have found myself looking at multiple versions of both the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I think someone said there are probably hundreds of translations of the Gita. And I know there are many, many of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So if you find words that don't sound right to you, please understand that it could be due to the choice of word of the translator and not to the original text. And it could also just simply be because we just don't understand well enough what's being said, because some of it is very, very deep. So the Yoga Vasistha begins with the story of the despondency of the Prince Rama as he tries and fails to understand the misery he has found in the world. The book then explains how to live in such a way as to find divine bliss, and it contains practical information on how to achieve this. Its main teaching is that everything is consciousness, and that the world is nothing but the play of consciousness. So what happens in the Yoga Vasistha at the beginning is that the Prince Rama returns from traveling around the country and has become disillusioned and dejected after experiencing the apparent reality of the world, with all its suffering, from which he has been shielded by his privileged life. His condition is a cause of great concern for his father, King Dasharatha, and the important courtiers. Upon the arrival in court of the sage Vasistha, the king expresses his concern to him. Vasistha consoles the king by telling him that Rama's dispassion, and for those of you who are interested in these words, it's vairagya in Sanskrit. So Rama's dispassion is a sign that the prince is now ready for spiritual enlightenment. He says that it is the fact that Rama has begun to understand the profound spiritual truths that has caused his confusion, and that he now needs spiritual instruction. The sage Vasistha asks King Dasharatha to summon Rama. Then, in the presence of the court of King Dasharatha, the sage addresses Rama in a discourse that lasts for many days. The conversation between the sage Vasistha and Prince Rama is of that between a great enlightened sage and a seeker who is in a state ready to attain liberation. The answers to Rama's questions form the entire scripture, that is the Yoga Vasistha. It explains how to live in such a way as to find divine bliss. As I said earlier, it contains practical information on how to achieve this. And just a reminder that its main teaching is that everything is consciousness and that the world is nothing but the play of consciousness. So at the end of what happens, Vasistha asks Rama what his difficulty is, and Rama speaks for page after page after page, going through every element of life, youth, old age, just everything, and what's wrong with it, wealth, poverty, you name it, he's being brought down by it. And really, you'd say, when you first look at it, you think, well, this is just totally negative. But at the end of it all, showers of flowers fall down from heaven, because it's in recognition of Rama's state of readiness to receive this high spiritual teaching. So it might look one way, but it's not. It's until a person becomes disillusioned with the illusory world, they aren't ready to move forward. So that's an interesting little event that occurs there. And in these stories, you do get showers of flowers coming down from heaven, which is always nice in the story. So now, to begin with, I will speak about the 4 particular helpers on the path. In the text, they are referred to as the 4 gatekeepers to the realm of liberation. Oh. So, a dictionary definition of a gatekeeper is an attendant at a gate who is employed to control who goes through it. Now, assuming that everyone wishes to attain liberation, you can see that if what this scripture is saying is true, by failing to heed these words, we will not attain it. As you hear the words that follow, you can decide for yourself if it sounds reasonable. So, by failing to heed these words, we will not attain liberation. And the 4 gatekeepers are self-control, the spirit of inquiry known as vichara, contentment, and good company. So I will go through them all. This is from the text. Not until the Supreme Being is realized will the dreadful miseries of birth and death come to an end. If this deadly serpent, known as ignorant life, is not overcome here and now, it gives rise to interminable suffering, not only in this, but in countless lifetimes to come. One cannot ignore this suffering. If you overcome this sorrow of repetitive history, you will live here on earth like a god. So the contrast between the dreadful miseries of birth and death and living on earth like a god. If you ask yourself, well, which would I prefer? I can't think anyone would prefer the miserable one. So there's an incentive to at least listen to what's being said in this. For when delusion is gone and the truth is realized by means of inquiry into self-nature, when the mind is at peace and the heart leaps to the supreme truth, when all the disturbing thought waves in the mind stuff have subsided and there is unbroken flow of peace, and the heart is filled with the bliss of the Absolute, when thus the truth has been seen in the heart, then this very world becomes an abode of bliss. So remember that the 4 gatekeepers to the realm of liberation are self-control, spirit of inquiry, vichara, contentment, and good company, which of course most of us will be familiar with the word satsanga. And then it says, okay, it says, the wise seeker should look diligently to cultivate the friendship of these, or at least one of them. And that always makes me laugh, because if you think, oh, that's a lot, when you hear the descriptions, you might think, well, I can't do all of them. But if so, pick one of them. So it's talking about diligently cultivating the friendship of one of these. So let's take a look at each one individually. So the first gatekeeper to the realm of liberation is self-control. In order to cross this formidable ocean of samsara, that is repetitive history, one should resort to that which is eternal and unchanging, He alone is best among men, whose mind rests in the eternal, and who is therefore fully self-controlled and at peace. One may wonder if such unchanging truth exists. If it does not, one comes to no harm by inquiring into the nature of life. Seeking the eternal will soften the pain caused by the changes of life. The eternal is not attained by rites and rituals, by pilgrimages, or by wealth. It is to be attained only by the conquest of one's mind, by the cultivation of wisdom. Hence, everyone should constantly seek the conquest of the mind and self-control, which are the fruits of wisdom. So you might say, well, how would we know if either we or anyone else is self-controlled? So here's a description of what you would expect to see. When the mind is at peace, pure, tranquil, free from delusion or hallucination, untangled and free from cravings, it does not long for anything, nor does it reject anything. This is self-control or conquest of the mind, one of the four gatekeepers to liberation. So if you just look at that list and, ask yourself, do I experience a mind that's pure, tranquil, free from delusion or hallucination, untangled and free from cravings? Do we long for anything or do we not? Do we reject anything? Those would be a description of someone who has conquered the mind through self-control. And that is one of the gatekeepers of liberation, the liberation. So here's some more. All that is good and auspicious flows from self-control. So all that is good and auspicious flows from self-control. All evil is dispelled by self-control. No gain, no pleasure in this world or in heaven is comparable to the delight of self-control. The delight one experiences in the presence of the self-controlled is incomparable. Everyone spontaneously trusts him. None hates him. Self-control is the best remedy for all physical and mental ills. When there is self-control, even the food you eat tastes better. He who wears the armor of self-control is not harmed by sorrow. So notice that word armor. So to me, that suggests that with self-control, it acts as a protective barrier, shielding us from harm. He who, even while hearing, touching, seeing, smelling, and tasting what is regarded as pleasant and unpleasant, is neither elated nor depressed, he is self-controlled. He who looks upon all beings with equal vision, having brought under control the sensations of pleasure and pain, is self-controlled. He who, though living amongst all, is unaffected by them, and neither feels elated nor hates, is self-controlled. With a pure heart and receptive mind, and without the veil of doubt and the restlessness of the mind, listen to the exposition of the nature and the means of liberation, O Rama. If this deadly serpent known as ignorant life is not overcome here and now, it gives rise to interminable suffering, not only in this, but in countless lifetimes to come. One cannot ignore this suffering, but one should overcome it by means of the wisdom that I shall impart to you. O Rama, if you thus overcome this sorrow of repetitive history, you will live here on earth itself like a god. So notice, and this is important, that the thing about liberation is that it's not about me getting liberated so I can go off into nirvana and spend all the rest of the time in bliss and with no pain, no misery. It's not about that. Liberation is about liberating ourselves from all our repetitive history, our karma, and being freed from all that by keeping the mind fixed on the eternal. Then the idea, and certainly this is a theosophical teaching, is that we then help others who are still in that state. And that's the whole point about this work, that it's for the benefit of others. But until we straighten ourselves out, until we subdue our own minds and have our minds under control, we won't be able to do it, and we will continue to suffer the misery. Such a person has nothing to acquire, nor anything to shun. He is untainted by the defects of life, untouched by its sorrow. Even religious duties are found to be unnecessary. It doesn't mean to say a person might not continue to perform religious duties, but they're not actually necessary. That's the point. Whereas it can be that the duties become everything, the rites and rituals become the end in itself. They're not, they're a means to an end. Once the end is achieved, then maybe they aren't necessary. So he is not affected by the past tendencies which have lost their momentum. And that's very important, because the momentum is what makes it hard to overcome. As you will know, with anything which has momentum, a car traveling at high speed, it's much more difficult to avoid hitting something in it when there's a brick wall in front. But if those have been calmed down and slowed down, then it gets much easier. So the past tendencies will have lost their momentum, and so he's no longer affected by them. His mind has given up its restlessness, and he rests in the bliss that is his essential nature. Such bliss is possible only by self-knowledge. Okay, only by self-knowledge. That is knowledge of the real self, not by worldly knowledge. So such bliss is possible only by self-knowledge, not by any other means. Hence, one should apply oneself constantly to self-knowledge. This alone is one's duty. And that's interesting, isn't it, to say this alone is one's duty. This is quite a controversial thing to say, but maybe it would be, you would say, above all else, seek self-knowledge, and then everything else falls into place. And whatever duty there is to perform, it will get performed well and properly, and you will be doing your own duty, as it says in the Gita, and not that of another. So that's the end of the what it has to say there about self-control. And by the way, I notice I'm reading a lot of he. Of course, these books were written long before we were concerned about gender, but he means everyone. So we're moving on to the second gatekeeper now. And the second gatekeeper to the realm of liberation is spirit of inquiry. The word is vichara, and the C is pronounced as a CH because I can't put the Sanskrit markings in it, but sorry, I'm thinking of the letter S. The C is always pronounced as cha. So you can take it from me, that's the case. So spirit of inquiry. What is inquiry? To inquire thus, who am I? Inquiry is not reasoning or analysis. It is directly looking into oneself. And we aren't looking for an answer to this question, because who am I ultimately is an unanswerable question. The point is to keep asking the question. So, inquiry should be undertaken by an intelligence that has been purified by a close study of the scripture. Now, this is very important, and more about this is said later. But learning how to act in life in this way, we have to look to scriptures. We have to look to ancient wisdom, not just looking into what we know, because what we know is worldly, and this is about something else, and the scriptures will point us in that direction. It doesn't say what scripture, although they do say this scripture later on, but anything that's real, genuine scripture is valid. So by such inquiry, the intelligence becomes keen and is able to realize the supreme. The spirit of inquiry protects one from the calamities that befall the unthinking fool, who is a storehouse of sorrow. It is the absence of inquiry that gives rise to actions that are harmful to oneself and to others. They in whom the spirit of inquiry is ever awake illumine the world, enlighten all who come in contact with them, dispel the ghosts created by an ignorant mind, and realize the falsity of sense pleasures and their objects. In the light of inquiry, there is a realization of the eternal and unchanging reality. This is the supreme. With it, one does not long for any other gain, nor does one spurn anything. He is free from delusion and attachment. He is not inactive, nor does he get drowned in action. So that's going back to that a person is meant to be active in the world. So it's not about retreating off somewhere and not participating in life. It's all about being actively engaged in life, but not getting drowned in the action, because there's the freedom from delusion and attachment. Knowledge of truth arises from such inquiry. From such knowledge, there follows tranquility in oneself, and then arise peace and the ending of all sorrow. So now that's the end of this second gatekeeper. But just as a reminder, what is inquiry? to inquire thus, who am I? Inquiry is not reasoning or analysis. It is directly looking into oneself. So we're not trying to use our monkey mind to work out who I am, but a direct looking into oneself. So now the third gatekeeper to the realm of liberation is contentment. Contentment is another gatekeeper to liberation. He who has quaffed the nectar of contentment does not relish craving for sense pleasures. No delight in this world is as sweet as contentment. What is contentment? I always think the answer to this is a bit back to front, so I'll put it the other way around after I've read it. So what is contentment? To renounce all craving for what is not obtained unsought, and to be satisfied with what comes unsought. So if you turn it around the other way, so contentment is firstly being satisfied with what comes unsought, but if something is so to what? To renounce all craving for what is not obtained unsought. So if something doesn't come to you that you maybe think you would have liked, to renounce any craving for it. If it's not coming to you, then you accept that and be content with it. But also be content with what does come unsought. So it's a very important point. But this is the most important thing. As long as one is not satisfied in the self, one will be subjected to sorrow. So it all comes back to being satisfied in the self. With the rise of contentment, the purity of one's heart blooms. And this is, I really like this sentence: the contented man who possesses nothing owns the world. So that's quite a short description of that gatekeeper, but it's very important. They're all important. And we now move on to the fourth gatekeeper, which is good company. The company of wise, holy, and enlightened persons is yet another gatekeeper to liberation. Good company enlarges one's intelligence and destroys one's ignorance and one's psychological distress. Whatever be the cost, however difficult it may be, whatever obstacles may stand in its way, the company of the holy and enlightened should never be neglected, for this alone is one's light on the path of life. One should, by every means in one's power, serve the holy ones who have realized the truth and in whose hearts the darkness of ignorance has been dispelled. So obviously, having access to someone who has realized the truth is probably not what most of us come across, maybe not in our lifetime. So what we have to look at, well, what can we have instead as good company? Well, number one, I would say, is the scriptures. I would say meetings like these, and when you can have them in person, discussions on these subjects. But we have to just find some way of keeping good company in everything we do. And of course, keeping good company also means the avoidance of bad company. And that can be difficult, but I would just say that we have to do our best to, as often as we can, keep good company and try to avoid at all costs any bad company. And as to realized sages, maybe one day they'll come along, but we'll see. So These four are the four surest means by which one can be saved from drowning in the ocean of samsara, repetitive history. Now it goes through the four. Contentment is the supreme gain. The company of the wise is the best companion to the destination. The spirit of inquiry is the greatest wisdom, and self-control is the supreme happiness. And then here's a nice little tip. If you are unable to resort to all of these four, then practice one. By diligent practice of one of these, the others will also be found in you. And I think that's a very interesting point to give us heart. And then this next sentence I think is pretty amazing. The highest wisdom will seek you of its own accord. Until you tame the wild elephant of your mind with the help of these noble qualities, you cannot have progress towards the supreme. So the highest wisdom will seek you of its own accord. So if you can't practice all of them, practice one. Now, at this point, I was going to read a story of one of the stories I told you about, but I'm not sure that we'll have enough time, so I'm going to move on to the second part of the talk and come back to that if there is time. It's an interesting story, but I think we need to cover everything in the text. So the next area I want to look at is self-effort. And self-effort is very much related to the four gatekeepers, I think. And there's a lot of interesting information in this. So in this world, whatever is gained only by self-effort. What is called fate is fictitious. So what exactly is self-effort? Self-effort is that mental, verbal, and physical action which is in accordance with the instructions of a holy person well versed in the scriptures. Self-effort which is not in accord with the scriptures is motivated by delusion. So in other words, if we're saying I'm going to make the effort to trample all over everyone in my path to get all the money I want to buy, something, huge house, huge car, exotic holidays, whatever. That kind of self-effort they're describing here as delusion, because that would not be in accord with the scriptures. Where there is obstruction in the fruit of the self-effort, one should examine it to see if there is such deluded action, and if there is, it should be immediately corrected. Self-effort is of two categories, that of past births and that of this birth. So just a word on that what we face in this life is the result of the self-effort of previous lives. So, but the point they make here is that the latter, that is that of this birth, effectively counteracts the former. Fate is none other than self-effort of a past incarnation. In other words, karma. There is constant conflict between these two, and in this incarnation, and that which is more powerful triumphs. The present is infinitely more potent than the past. So the important thing there is to realize that saying something like, "Oh, I'm ill-fated," or "I've been born unlucky," or anything like that it's not fair. I shouldn't have to be facing this. The thing about it is that in this lifetime, by following principles given out earlier. Just accept what's in front of you and make every effort to follow the advice you would get in any scriptures and act according to that. And then whatever you bring into this lifetime is counterbalanced. And the point is that the present is infinitely more potent than the past. So don't feel defeated if you come across things that you don't like in your life. Just make that effort now. There is no power greater than right action in the present. The lazy man is worse than a donkey. I feel sorry for the donkeys whenever I read that out, but I don't know that donkeys are that lazy. One should never yield to laziness, but strive to attain liberation. Strive to attain liberation. One who says, fate is directing me to do this, is brainless. It doesn't pull its punches, does it? Brainless. And the goddess of fortune abandons him. And then this next statement is interesting. Self-effort is another name for divine will. And the parallel I see that with that is in the Christian teaching, when Jesus is going to die on the cross, he says, but thy will, not my will. So in other words, you're not going with your habitual will that is selfish. You're going to a higher will, and that is self-effort. That's what it's saying here. Self-effort is another name for divine will. As is the effort, so is the fruit. When afflicted by suffering, people cry, alas, that God sends me to heaven or to hell. Alas, look at my fate. It is ignorant to attribute all this to an outside agency and to say that God sends me to heaven or to hell, or that an outside agency makes me do this or that. Fate, or divine dispensation, is merely a convention which has come to be regarded as truth by being repeatedly declared to be true. Now, I don't know enough about it at all, but I should think that this is maybe something that has exists more in the tradition that this originates from than generally now, because I don't know that this is generally so much considered. But anyway, in case it is, so it's not true, but it's a convention, and it's come to be regarded as truth by repeatedly being declared to be true. Renounce fatalism and apply yourself to self-effort. They indeed are fools who do not engage themselves in self-effort now. Self-effort is based on these three: knowledge of the scriptures, instructions of the preceptor or teacher, and one's own effort. Fate or divine dispensation does not enter here. He who desires salvation should divert the impure mind to pure endeavor by persistent effort. This is the very essence of all scriptures. And I think this next sentence is very powerful. The holy ones emphasize, persistently tread the path that leads to the eternal good. So note the strong emphasis on striving always to do good, to be good. And the wise seeker knows the fruit of my endeavors will be commensurate with the intensity of my self-effort, and neither fate nor a god can ordain it otherwise. Right from one's childhood, one should endeavor to promote one's true good, or salvation, by a keen, intelligent study of the scriptures, by having the company of the holy ones, and by right self-effort. So that's the end of what I'm going to quote from the Yoga Vasistha. And I'm going to finish with some advice from theosophy and from some other sources on helping us on the path. So you could ask the question, why bother to study the Yoga Vasistha, the secret doctrine, the Upanishads, or any great spiritual writings? Well, you've just heard a number of reasons why this is not only worthwhile, but essential on the path. And this is what H.P. Blavatsky had to say on this subject. And this comes from, it's called How to Study Theosophy. A few weeks before, sorry, I put that slide up too soon, but a few weeks before her death in May 1891, Robert Bowen reports that in a conversation with her, she said the following. And note that what she says is referring to the study of the SD, but I suggest that it's the same process involved in trying to understand any spiritual text. So, the brain is the instrument of waking consciousness, and every conscious mental picture formed means change and destruction of the atoms of the brain. Ordinary intellectual activity moves on well-beaten paths in the brain, but does not compel sudden adjustments and destructions in its substance. But this new kind of mental effort calls for something very different, the carving out of new brain paths. Some of you will have heard of the theosophical teacher Pablo Sender. By way of explanation of the significance of HPB's statement, Pablo explains that every time we think about something, pathways are carved out, and thinking then goes through those already made pathways. So, in other words, this is our habitual way of doing everything, because it's like water finding its way down a mountain. It starts to go in a certain way, and then to divert that is difficult. So that's the normal state of we do things and think the way we always thought. Without higher use of the mind, the brain is unable to receive higher perception. Unable. We shape the brain so that we are more able to receive higher intuition. And the way we shape the brain is by making ourselves open to higher sources in the way that I've just been describing in this talk. Now, so on this subject, a fourth way teacher, Maurice Nicoll, had this to say. And by the way, not so long ago, a month ago or something, Gary Lackman gave a talk all about Maurice Nicoll, who was a pupil of Uspensky in the fourth way tradition. So according to fourth way teacher Maurice Nicoll, such writings are deliberately designed to work in the mind in the direction of lifting the natural level, natural meaning like the water going down, carving out a path down a mountainside. That would be the natural level. But if you want to work against that, these writings are deliberately designed to work in the mind in the direction of lifting the natural level of comprehension to another level of meaning. And hence, such study is a transforming instrument. Transforming instrument. Note that this transformation will not take place if the mind is not turned to that which is higher. Okay, so it doesn't happen by accident. We have to make efforts. And this goes back to what was said about self-effort. Just have to make the effort to give a little bit of time to spiritual work. This is H.P. Blavatsky on self-knowledge. So she has this to say. The first necessity for obtaining self-knowledge is to become profoundly conscious of ignorance, to feel with every fibre of the heart that one is ceaselessly self-deceived. So that sounds harsh, but we just have to realize what's really going on with us. So the second requisite is the still deeper conviction that such knowledge, such intuitive and certain knowledge, can be obtained by effort. The third and most important is an indomitable determination to obtain and face that knowledge. She goes on, self-knowledge of this kind is unattainable by what men usually call self-analysis. It is not reached by reasoning or any brain process, for it is the awakening to consciousness of the divine nature of man. The awakening to consciousness of the divine nature of man. And she says, to obtain that knowledge, this knowledge, is a greater achievement than to command the elements or to know the future. And that appears in a magazine she named Lucifer, and it's also in the Collected Writings, Volume 8. And so I would like to finish with this special quotation from the spiritual teacher Ramana Maharshi. Correcting oneself is correcting the whole world. The sun is simply bright. It does not correct anyone. Because it shines, the whole world is full of light. Transforming yourself is a means of giving light to the whole world. So that is the end of my talk. It's very surreal, this story, but it's about trying to understand the unreality of this world appearance. So here's the story. A young boy asked his nanny to tell him a story, and the nanny told him the following story, to which the boy listened with great attention. Well, here we go. Once upon a time, in a city which did not exist, there were 3 princes who were brave and happy. Of them, 2 were unborn, and the third had not been conceived. Unfortunately, all their relatives died. The princes left their native city to go elsewhere. Very soon, unable to bear the heat of the sun, they fell into a swoon. Their feet were burnt by hot sand. The tips of grass pierced them. They reached the shade of 3 trees, of which 2 did not exist, and the third had not even been planted. After resting there for some time and eating the fruits of those trees, they proceeded forth. So you notice it's just full of contradictory statements. They reached the banks of 3 rivers. Of them, 2 were dry, and in the third there was no water. The princes had a refreshing bath and quenched their thirst in them. Then they reached a huge city which was about to be built. Entering it, they found 3 palaces of exceeding beauty. Of them, 2 had not been built at all, and the third had no walls. They entered the palaces and found 3 golden plates. 2 of them had been broken in 2, and the third had been pulverized. They took hold of the one which had been pulverized. They took 99 minus 100 grams of rice and cooked it. Then they invited 3 holy men to be their guests. Of them, 2 had no body, and the third had no mouth. After these holy men had eaten the food, the three princes partook of the rest of the food cooked. They were greatly pleased. Thus they lived in that city for a long, long time in peace and joy. And the nanny says, "My child, this is an extremely beautiful legend. Pray remember this always, and you will grow up into a learned man."